All right, so today we are here to talk about the Sony WH-1000XM6. These are the latest flagship headphones from my friends over at Sony, and I'm here to give you all of my thoughts. Also, I'll be including some comparisons along the way with the XM5, to kind of let you know how they're performing under different aspects like ANC, ambient mode, etc. So just want to throw that out there. So let's not waste any time. First and foremost, though, this video is being recorded in one take with minimal edits, so please bear with me if I misspeak or make any mistakes, or if I have to repeat myself. That's just the way it goes. So let's get straight into it. So first up, let's start with this unboxing here. So I've already opened it because I've been testing these, but I kind of wanted to give you the experience anyway. So let's do it. So right here, we've got Sony's new sustainable packaging they've been using for the past couple of years. Love to see that. So let's go ahead and get this part out of the way. So that's out of here. And then you got 1000X series right there on the box. Drop that down out of the way. Get the top out of the way here. Now here you've got your booklets. Let's see here. Yep. All right. Seems like, yeah, limited warranty, user guide. Okay. So we'll get that out of the way. So actually we'll just leave that right here. So there it is. Boom. So now we've got the carrying case here. Now this carrying case is slightly smaller than what we got with the Sony XM5. Actually, hang on. Let me reach over here. Let me grab them. I've got my XM5 case around here somewhere. All right, perfect. So I've got it right here. So let's go ahead and do a quick comparison so you can just kind of see them side by side. So it's not a huge difference in size, but it is, it is a bit smaller. You can kind of see it right there. Just slightly, but definitely a bit smaller than the XM5. So let me get that out of the way once again. Now, one of the main differences here is we are using a magnetic clasp. Also, the case itself is color matched to the color of the headphones. The headphones that I've got here are going to be in midnight blue. So let's go ahead and pop this open. So as you can see here, one of the biggest things that we've been hearing about with the XM6 was the fact that they were going back to that foldable and rotating design. So you've got those right here. Now, getting these out of the way, in here, we've also got a couple of cables. So we've got your aux cable right here. I believe this one is 1.2 meters on that one, 3.5 to 3.5. And then we've got a very, very, very tiny USB-A to USB-C charging cable right there. So those are the cables that are included with that. You got a nice little carrying strap right here, but love to see that. So here we have the headphones themselves. Now let me get this case out of the way. There we go. All right, so now we can punch in a little bit and you guys can take a closer look at the all new Sony 1000XM6 in their midnight blue. So check that out. Give a little bit more of a close up there for you. But yeah, I like this color. I had my choice of colors. Huge shout out to Sony. They did send these over for testing and review, but they also gave me the option of which color I wanted to go with. So just throwing this in here. So now moving on, let's talk about the build quality and let's talk about the comfort here. So sorry, I'm moving my notes around a little bit there. So I had to have my notes in front of me or else I'll get completely lost and just talk myself in circles. We don't want to do that. So moving it over here. Now, again, as I said, the XM6 are available in 3 colors, this being the midnight blue. There's also black and there's also silver. Now, overall, the build quality remains very similar to the XM5 and the other Sony models. Very lightweight, plastic with some metal on the inside. So the major exceptions here are the return of the folding and rotating ear cups. So this is something that a lot of people complained about, which makes a lot of sense. People want the fold-up design. That's what we had on the XM4. That's what we had on the XM3. And they did go back to it with the Sony ULT Wear, and it's good to see that they've gone completely back to it with the Sony XM6. So on top of that, there also appears to be new reinforcement on the hinge itself, and the headband itself has also been widened compared to that of the XM5. So I've got the Mark 5s right here, so you can kind of see the difference there. So look at the difference in the headbands. So yeah, that's a noticeable difference there. And that's actually something that I can feel on my head. So if you're, a baldy or a shaved head guy like myself, it is something that you will notice. The comfort is noticeably improved there. Now, moving on from there, one of the other things I wanted to mention is that being that now we do have this widened feel to it, it's asymmetrical. So it's very easy to tell which side is right and left just from feel. So that's something that I definitely, there's no confusion about, okay, which side am I putting them on? Am I putting them on backwards? There's none of that. Asymmetrical design makes it much easier for us to figure that out right there on the fly. Additionally, we do have ear pads that are similar to the XM5. They are still detachable and replaceable, so that is something you can do. Now, as expected, the XM6 are still super, super lightweight. These come in at just 254 grams, so very, very lightweight, especially compared to something, say, like the Apple AirPods Max. Yeah, these are way, way lighter than those. So overall, in my experience so far using these for the past few weeks, the comfort with the Sony XM6 has been excellent, as to be expected. They feel very lightweight while I'm wearing them, and they have good clamping force on my head. This means that they stay put really nicely while I'm out on my walks, and they can serve you well if you're looking for a new set of gym headphones. Now, while I didn't have too much to complain about with the Sony XM5 when it came to comfort, that narrow headband, it did indeed become slightly problematic during longer listening sessions. If you have hair or you wore a beanie or whatever, it was a non-issue, but for somebody like me, head gets a little sensitive after a while. So this problem so far has been completely eliminated with the Sony XM6. We love to see that. Okay, now let's go ahead and move over to the controls. So controls here are going to be minimal. So basically, this is something we had very similar to the Sony X Mark V, where we only had 2 buttons. Now, the major difference here is the design of the buttons here. So we've only got the noise canceling ambient mode button, and then we've got the power/pairing button right there. And that is pretty much it. Now, comparatively, when we look at the Sony X Mark V, on this one, we have the buttons right here. So you can, let me see if it'll focus in. And thank you. We have the NC button here and the power button here, but the problem is by feel, they could get a little confusing because they definitely felt the same. So I think that was the major reasoning behind them making this switch over to having them actually feel different to the touch, because this one, the power button has a slight recess to it, makes it very obvious to tell which one exactly it is. So we definitely love to see that. So this one does, as I said, it operates as power on, power off. And if you long press it while you're powering on, this does put the headphones into pairing mode. And then a single press while they're turned on will give you the battery life of the headphones. Moving on from there, you have the NC A and B button. This basically controls the noise cancellation and the ambient mode, so it lets you toggle between the two. Now, this button can also be reprogrammed in the Sony Sound Connect app for double tap or triple tap to activate Spotify or Amazon Music. Now, I don't use either of those streaming services, so I can't really say how well that works. I actually prefer to use Apple Music and Tidal or locally stored FLAC files, just because I prefer the superior audio quality. So, you know, don't come at me. I'm just not a Spotify user. Sorry. I'm just saying, just got to be honest, got to keep it real with you guys. I'm just saying. Now, there is a combination here because with the XM6, just like the XM5s and the ULT Wears as well, if I remember correctly, we are using button controls, but we're also using a touchpad on the right ear cup. So just something to keep in mind with the right ear cup is basically you can slide up or down, and that's going to be your volume control. And then you can go forward or backwards for skipping tracks forward and back, as well as a double tap to play and pause. This can also be used for answering calls and things of that nature. Additionally, from that, you can also cover the right ear cup just like this, just cover it up, and this will activate the transparency mode as well as lowering the volume so you can actually hear, like if somebody walks up to you, or maybe you're at an airport and you want to hear an announcement, that is the quick attention mode, and it definitely works very, very well so far in my personal experience. Now, there are also voice commands and head gestures if you're into doing stuff like that. Personally, I mean, they do work fairly well, but I'm just not one of those dudes that likes to like call out voice commands to my headphones in public. That's just not my style. So I don't personally use them, but it is something that works. Additionally, the XM6 still offer wear detection. So that works for automatic playing and pausing when you're placing the headphones on your head or removing them from your head. Works very well 100% of the time in my experience. So they've already got that really, really nicely dialed in. But this can also be turned off in the app if you choose to do that. So overall, as I said before, the controls are still very similar to that of the XM5. So they're pretty much tied here as far as it goes for the control scheme on the headphones themselves. So that's going to bring us over to the connectivity of these headphones. So let's talk about the Bluetooth connection. So the XM6 are compatible with both Android and iOS devices. I've tested them both with my iPhone. I've got my iPhone 16 Pro Max, 16 Pro Max right here, or 15 Pro Max. 15 Pro Max. Sorry, my bad on that one. And then I've also got my Nothing Phone 3a Pro right here, and also my Pixel 9 Pro XL, as well as my iPad. And those are the devices that I tested with, and overall, The experience has been great, especially with the multi-point capabilities where you can connect to 2 devices at once. It works perfectly fine. As far as Bluetooth, they are using Bluetooth 5.3, and for codecs, we've got SBC, AAC, LDAC for high res, as well as LC3, which was a surprise to me, but we do have that here. Unfortunately, we don't have any coverage for like Snapdragon sound as I'm aware of, but I just wanted to throw that in there. Now, when it comes to Bluetooth range, I was able to get just about 14 meters or just under 46 feet. That was using the AAC codec. If you do switch over to LDAC, that will drop to about 9 meters or about 25.5 feet. So LDAC, you will get some connectivity issues. So LDAC is best used when you're just kind of sitting still, in my personal experience. Now, there is an LE audio option here. It says beta on there for compatible Android devices that does reduce latency for mobile gaming. So the latency is already minimal when it goes to watching movies or TV shows like YouTube or TikTok or whatever. But for mobile gaming, you will notice a bit of latency. Now, with LE audio on an Android device, it is noticeably reduced, so it does work fairly well. But I did experience some connection glitches and some dropouts in my testing. To be fair, Sony does call this a beta feature, so user experience may vary on that one. It would be cool for them to really get that dialed in and offer us a proper low latency gaming mode that you can just toggle on. I mean, that'd be awesome. Not enough headphones offer this at this time in 2025, so I'd love to see Sony step up and kind of set that standard that other companies will then have to kind of follow suit. So please, Sony, do this for us. Do us a favor. Do the mobile gamers a favor, right? Let's see if we can do something like that. Now, let me go ahead and turn these headphones on really quick because I want to go ahead and show you guys the Sony Sound Connect app. So let me go ahead and turn the headphones on, and then let me turn on my Bluetooth here on this phone. Double check here. Give me just a sec. And connected. And XM6, and there we go. So XM6 are now paired up. All right, so let's go into the Sony Sound Connect app, and I'm going to try to go ahead and see if we can zoom in a bit more so you guys can see this a bit more clear. There we go. Okay, so here we have the Sony Sound Connect app. So there's a power button at the top if you want to shut your headphones down. In here, we already see that we have the battery percentage, 85% plus a battery bar. There's a little eye symbol here that you can hit. When using the headphones while charging them, charging stops approximately 80% to reduce battery wear. To charge to 100%, turn off the headphones. So yeah, so that's if you're using them while they're being charged. So below this, these are the kind of the quick controls that Sony has sort of optimized their app for. You have ambient sound control off, ambient sound and noise cancellation. But if you want to dig deeper into that, you hit the little arrow. This will take you straight into this menu. So right now it's on normal mode. Here we have ambient sound. Here's a couple different settings. There's auto ambient sound, which will self-adjust the volume of the ambient sound filtered in depending on the level of noise around you. So it's kind of like adaptive noise cancellation, but for ambient mode, which I thought was pretty cool, and it actually works surprisingly well. There's also a voice pass-through mode. Now going over to noise cancellation, so this reduces noise. This is going to be your ANC on full strength, so that's something to keep in mind right there. So back to off. Now going back here, now we have your listening mode, and this is your 360 reality audio here. So you have standard, that's just normal mode. So let me jump into it this way. So this is standard. So that's just when you're just listening to music, doing your regular stuff, going about your business, that's just normal. Then we have this background music mode. And basically what this sounds like, the background music, it literally creates an effect like it's background music. So it creates like a really wide sound field. It doesn't sound normal like if you're trying to listen to music. It does sound like it's at a distance. And it has a couple different settings in here where one is living room, so it'll sound like it's in the other room. There's one that's called my room, so it'll sound like it's in the same room with you, and then another one that's like a cafe, which makes it super wide. So there's a couple different modes. It's kind of cool, like if it's like, work from home, or you just want some kind of like background music without disturbing the people around you. It is something that works pretty well. Now moving on from there, we also have the cinema mode, and the cinema mode here, this is their full-on 360 reality audio. This does upmix regular music and regular TV shows and movies into this 360 reality audio. It actually works surprisingly well. It doesn't work perfectly with everything, but it does work really well on a ton of different music as well as TV shows and movies. I was genuinely impressed with this feature, just throwing that out there. But yeah, so we've got that here. Those are your listening modes. Now beyond this, we have your EQ. Now EQ here, there's a lot of different presets in here. So you've got, let's go here to off. This is how it comes default. So you've got default, that's off, and then you have heavy, clear, hard, soft, game, manual. This is my personal EQ. So I'll go ahead and you guys can take a look at that. You can pause it here if you ever want to try my personal EQ settings. And then from there, there's custom 1. Custom 2 will actually work off of your sound optimization. You find your equalizer right here. It's like a listening test, and it'll build you an EQ based off of your listening. I still prefer my own manual EQ over the one that it created for me. So just throwing that in. But yeah, so now let's back out of here. Those are your EQ modes. You have your adaptive sound control. This is where it'll base your noise cancellation, transparency, and all of that based on what you're doing. So it can be like, if I'm sitting down, I can have noise canceling turned on, but if I get up to walk around, it'll automatically activate transparency mode if that's what I want. So you have a couple of different settings that you can do there. Connected devices, that's going to be your multi-point controls right there. Speak to chat, if you toggle that on, anytime you talk with the headphones on, it'll turn on transparency mode. I tend to leave that off because sometimes I'll sing along to my music or hum along, so I'll leave that off. That's music controls right there. Then we have device settings. That'll bring you over to all of these. This is where you have your find EQ, spatial sound optimization, Bluetooth connection quality, DSEE extreme. Then we have system. That's your multi-point connected to devices, voice control, voice assistant, touch sensor control panel. You could turn that off if you want. This is where you can control the NC ambient button settings, quick access here, head gestures, because there are head gestures and voice gestures. There's your LE audio connection setting for headphones. That's that beta that I was telling you about. We have that included here as well. Then we have the enable headphones, microphone operation, automatic power off, pause when headphones are removed. That's your ear detection on there. So we've got a lot of different settings, update software, initialize settings, all of this stuff included in here as well. So a ton of different options in the app, definitely something that you want to use. Now, here's the thing. You can still use the headphones completely without a problem without the app, but I strongly recommend it if you really want to get the XM6s dialed in to your own personal flavors. Just throwing that in. Also, one thing I did forget to mention when I was talking about the connections on the Sony XM6, we also have a 3.5 millimeter port. Obviously, you guys already saw the aux cable. You can run these via 3.5 millimeter. I'm just saying, so just want to make sure that was clear and that I threw that in there. Like I said, we're doing this raw dog style. I'm just doing this live with minimal edits, so some things may get missed or skipped. It happens. Bear with me, but I appreciate it. Now, if you're looking for something super highly polished, there's going to be a ton of other reviews from some of those big, huge name YouTubers out there. Feel free to check those out. They're going to have all the production quality that you're looking for. It's going to look like a freaking movie. I'm just not that guy. I'm just kind of here to give you the raw facts of my experience with these headphones. So if you rock with me, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But now let's move on to some of the actual performance. So when we're talking about battery for the Sony WH-1000XM6, the battery performance here is still similar to what we got with the XM5, right around 30 hours with noise cancellation on, 40 hours with noise cancellation turned off on a single charge. Now this number does drop to around 24 to 36 hours depending on which combination of features you're using, like active noise cancellation, LDAC, 360 audio, listening at higher volume levels. All of that is going to affect how fast you wear the battery down. That being said, even if it's at its minimum of like 24 hours of noise cancellation on and 360 audio and LDAC and like all the bells and whistles, 24. Who's listening for 24 hours straight? To be completely honest, right? Most flights aren't even that long. To be fair. So just saying, overall battery life is still very, very good. There are headphones on the market that are pushing 50, 60 or more, but they're not going to bring the level of performance that you're getting out of the Sony XM6s. I'm just saying, but still. Now, if you do happen to run these headphones all the way down, you can charge them. They do have an upgraded fast charging feature. So 3 minutes plugged in will give you an additional 3 hours worth of playback time. So that's pretty dope. And then as far as recharging these headphones, they do charge via USB-C that you can see right here, USB-C port. So you've got that right there. Let me see if I can bring it in a little closer. There we go. All right. Sometimes it won't zoom for me. Or sometimes it won't focus for me. All right, so now moving on from here, Now let's talk about the active noise cancellation, because that's what a lot of people are interested in when it comes to the Sony XM6. So now the XM6 are featuring a new Sony QN3 processor for the best noise cancellation Sony has ever offered. Additionally, the XM6 are also featuring 12 mics, which is 4 more than what they had on the XM5. And this gives the XM6 a distinct hardware advantage over the previous model. And the ANC strength here is ridiculously good. Like, it is ridiculously good. So while it's not a massive upgrade over the XM5, the difference is subtle, but it is noticeable. So I tested this I tested the ANC by using 75 decibels worth of crowd noise in this room, as well as 85 decibels worth of airliner cabin noise. That is some seriously loud noise with a lot of bass, man. And in both tests, the XM6 did a better job of canceling out most of the noise. Now, I say that very specifically, most of the noise, because these are not soundproof. So some noise still gets through. So there are some people that have come at me in my comment section and been like, I still hear noise. I still hear voices. Like, were you expecting to hear nothing at all? Like, you have to understand the way that noise cancellation works. It doesn't block everything, but it does reduce most of the noise. So I just want to make that very clear. Now, if you have the ANC on and then you play music, all you're going to hear is your music. So I'm just want to make that very, very clear. If you're just going to listen with noise cancellation on, but with like no music playing or no shows or anything, yeah, you're still probably going to pick up some of the noise around you. That's just the way ANC works in 2025. So I just wanted to clarify all of that. Now, the XM6 also did a better job of pulling the low and the mid frequencies out of human voices. So that's one thing I noticed. It's subtle, but it did do a better job of tamping down voices. So that was very, very impressive. There are also, as I mentioned before, there's also adaptive ANC controls where the XM6s can switch between ANC and ambient modes depending on what you're doing. So that's a feature that you can use as well if you choose to do so. So that's an option that you have right there. Now let's talk about the let's move over to this. Let's talk about the ambient mode. So ambient mode, also known as transparency mode, depending on who you ask. And the ambient mode on the Sony XM6 is further improved by the new processor and the added microphones. Now this gives the XM6 a more natural and a more precise sound to the ambient mode. So you can sort of, you can sort of pick out where, like, the directionality of noise around you a little bit better with the XM6s. It isn't a huge difference, as I said before, but if something's next to you or behind you, you can pick that up a little bit easier as opposed to all of it being pumped in stereo. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's sort of what I'm getting at with the XM6s. Now these also have ever so slightly less white noise than the XM5 with the ambient turned up to max. I actually don't use the ambient mode at max setting. I actually use it right around, I think it's like 12 or 13, because it goes from 0 to 20. So I use it right around like 12 or 13, and that reduces a lot of the white noise, but still allows a lot of the external noise in. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot, at least for me personally. And overall, it sounds really, really good. And again, as I mentioned before, there's that auto ambient sound feature that reminds me of, adaptive ANC, and it actually works surprisingly well. And it basically makes it so, like, if there's really loud noises going on around you, it'll reduce the ambient sound level so that your ears don't get blown out by loud noises outside. So overall, all of these improvements coming together make the XM6 definitely stand out for transparency mode and ANC over the previous model of the Sony XM5. So now that's going to bring us over to the sound quality and the volume. Now, I wasn't able to measure the actual volume decibel levels, but overall volume to me feels extremely similar on both of these headphones. They both get more than loud enough for me, probably going to be more than loud enough for, I would say, 99% of most people out there. So just wanted to throw that in. Now, for sound quality, the XM6s are using new driver units for, and I quote, richer details and clearer vocals. They were also tuned by a handful of award-winning mastering engineers. However, the default sound of the Sony XM6 is still very much a Sony sound signature. So it's warm sound with solid bass response, but they still lack the forward mid-range and the brighter treble that I personally prefer. So now, thankfully, Sony did give us a 10-band EQ that gives us the ability to adjust the XM6s to our own personal preference. preferences. And these, these EQ settings that I made to get them up to my personal preference for sound, I showed them to you earlier. I'll put them back up on the screen again so you can see that you can, pause the video here if you wish. And that way you can say, hey, you know what, let me try El Jefe's EQ for myself, see if it's something that I like, or maybe it's something that you can build off of. But here it is right here. Let me go ahead and bring it a little closer to the screen right there. So you can go ahead and pause it. If you want to mess with it, feel free. And if you really want to get a lot of thump out of it, the very last one on the left, raise that all the way to 6. And that'll think you'll get bass head certification at that point. So yeah, but that's my personal preference as far as that goes, to really kind of get these to open up and sound the way that I personally like them to sound. Now, again, the XM6s are also featured up mixing to spatial audio by using their 360 reality audio feature. And as I mentioned before, there are 3 different listening modes. There's a standard, background music, cinema. I already went through all of that with you before. But this is something that I think works really well, should be mentioned here. I don't use it all the time, but when I'm watching TV shows and movies paired to to my TV, excellent. I love the way that it sounds when I do that. So overall, a very good experience when it comes to that. Now, but I digress. Let's go ahead and break down the actual sound of the Sony XM6s. So the XM6, they have a strong and clean bass response. Now, it's not on the level of like the Sony ULT Wear. Those things are straight bass cannons, but still good enough to satisfy, even if you're not a total bass head, or if you're somebody who prefers a more balanced sound signature, then yeah, these can definitely do a good job of dialing that back and not overrunning the mids. So it's strong, but it's not overly done. And it hits hard and it gets out of there when needed without muddying up the mid range, which I really like. So this is very clean bass in my personal opinion. And it's also surprisingly versatile and responds to EQ very well, as I said before, so you can increase it or dial it back as needed for your own personal tastes. Now, for my bass heads out there, make sure you try out Solo by Future. Now, the sub bass on this track is killer, and these headphones, it's a must have, because these headphones can really shine, and you can hear the depth of the bass and how clean it is with this song. So definitely try that out. And as I said, if you go +6 on that bass slider, dude, bass head certified 100%, man. So now let's move over and let's talk about the mid range on the Sony XM6. Now, by default, the mid range was a bit flat for my personal taste. So that's why with my EQ, I boosted the mid range and I boosted the treble as well. We'll talk about that in a sec. So now the mids have a warmer texture and are much more forward in the mix. And this adjustment really, truly wakes up the mids and delivers a much better listening experience for both vocals as well as live instruments, bands, and things of that nature. Now, one of the test tracks that I used here, I was listening to At Your Best by the late, great Aaliyah. This is a must if you want to experience what I'm hearing in the mid-range. Now, this is a 90s R&B classic that always finds a way to give me goosebumps as well as draw tears under the right circumstances if it gets me in my feels. So pretty sure that most people can relate. Now, make sure you check it out if you haven't, and let me know what you think. Now let's move on and talk about the treble here. So with the Sony XM6, the treble starts off a bit dull, but it definitely comes to life with EQ adjustment. That's why I like the fact that they included that 10-band EQ. I added a bit more energy to the treble to help open up the sound a bit more. And the treble gets nice and bright with classical or mariachi music with loud horns, nice strings, but it still rolls off early enough to not be sibilant or harsh or offensive. And this adds more airiness and detail to the sound that Sony should have given us by default. At least that's just for my personal preference. Now, one of the songs that I used for testing here was Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra. And this can give you a very good impression of what I'm hearing when it comes to the treble after my adjustments. Now, I'm going to leave links to all 3 of those songs down in the video description, so make sure you check those out if you don't know what I'm talking about. Now, when it comes to any sort of constructive criticism to give to Sony with the XM6 here, I would say mainly it would come down to the default EQ. A bit more added clarity wouldn't hurt. It almost feels like maybe, actually to now that it reminds me, to quote my buddy Brandon from This Is Tech Today, it sort of feels like Sony really wants to play it safe with their EQ tuning. But I would really like a bit more aggressiveness when it comes to adding brightness and adding clarity to that sound. And I know they have all the different defaults and all of that stuff, but still, I think this is something that could definitely work in their favor, if I'm being completely honest. Aside from that, the only other one I would say would be probably that the call quality could probably use a little bit of tweaking here. And I'm going to play some call samples for you here in just a sec. Some microphone samples actually, so you guys can hear this for yourselves. But I think it needs a little bit of tweaking because in my opinion, I think the XM5 mics are still slightly outperforming them in my testing. So might be a controversial take. You're going to have to be the judge for yourselves on that one, but more on that in just a sec. Now, two questions that I know are going to come up in my comment section. The first one is going to be, are the XM6s better than the XM5s? Yes, but not by much. So let me explain. The difference in performance is subtle but noticeable, as I mentioned before. So for ANC and ambient modes, it's a win, right? But it's not by much. Now, to be fair, the XM5s already perform so strong that it's got to be difficult to top them, even for Sony. They're probably like scratching their heads like, what the hell are we going to do? Friggin' redesign the wheel. How strong? Because it's like, how strong can you go before it actually causes you discomfort, right? That's the thing. So they can only go so far. So, but I think they did a really, really good job of doing this subtle adjustments to it to actually make it perceptibly stronger without causing me any fatigue or any cabin pressure, which I thought was really cool. And another one for Sony for the XM6s comes from the added comfort and portability with the return of the folding and rotating design. Now, when it comes to sound quality, they're still neck and neck with the XM5s for me personally, since I still have to make substantial EQ adjustments to get any of those Sony 1000 series headphones to suit my taste. That's with the XM3, the 4, the 5, and the 6. So that's just, for me personally, that's what I've had to do. Now, lastly, build quality. Now, they seem to have addressed the build quality by adding more metal and adding reinforcements into this hinge. And I'm assuming that, that they did this in order to address a lot of the complaints that, people saw on Reddit and on different YouTube videos. So I'm assuming that's what they did here. But unfortunately, only time will tell how well this will work. So now, to be clear, my Mark Vs, my hinges are still fine on my Mark Vs. So I don't have any issues there, but just throwing that in there, that might be, that might be something for people to kind of take notice of, that they did make some adjustments there. So hopefully this added build quality will make the bigger difference. Now, the second question that I want to talk about is going to be what the next question would naturally be. So are the XM6 worth buying if you already have the Sony XM5? That's a tough call, but I'm going to have to say no. And the difference in performance isn't enough to justify spending that additional amount, in my opinion. But if you are on the XM3 or the XM4, then the XM6s would be a solid upgrade, in my opinion, and you can skip the lack of rotating and folding from the XM5s. So, but one thing I will say, as always, and I've said this in multiple videos in the past, do yourself a favor and wait for the inevitable discounts that come from, midsummer sales from many online retailers. So hopefully we'll see some discounts there. Now, let's go ahead and jump into those microphone samples. And, with the XM6, I'm also going to throw in the XM5 and the Sony ULT Wear to see how they all stack up to each other. And this way you can hear what I'm talking about for yourselves. Now, here's the thing. The XM6s are using 6 beamforming mics and feature AI noise reduction trained on 500 million voice samples. The XM5s are still only using 4 mics, as well as using their AI as well. So this should be a good comparison. You guys let me know what you think. All right, here we have the Sony WH-1000XM6 microphone sample. Testing, 1, 2, 3. As you can see, I'm indoors in a semi-quiet room. So testing, 1, 2, 3. All right, and here we have the microphone sample for the Sony WH-1000XM5. So testing, 1, 2, 3. As you can see, once again, I'm indoors in a semi-quiet room. So testing, 1, 2, 3. All right, here we have the microphone sample for the Sony ULT Wear. So testing, 1, 2, 3. As you can see, once again, I'm indoors in a semi-quiet room. So testing, 1, 2, 3. And here we have the Sony WH-1000XM6 in a simulated crowd noise environment. So something like a busy bar, a crowded restaurant, or something along those lines. So testing, 1, 2, 3. And here we have the Sony WH-1000XM5 in a simulated crowd noise environment. So something like a busy bar, a crowded restaurant, or something along those lines. So testing, 1, 2, 3. And here we have the Sony ULT Wear in a simulated crowd noise environment. So something like a busy bar, a crowded restaurant, or something along those lines. So, testing, 1, 2, 3. Now, with all of that out of the way, and for full disclosure, my pair of Sony WH-1000XM6 headphones were provided by Sony for testing and review purposes, as I said earlier in this video. However, no money was exchanged and no partnerships or sponsorships were offered or accepted. That said, Sony received no rights for copy or script approval and were not allowed to see this video prior to it being published. Sony is watching this video at the same time that you are. Now, I'm telling you all of this because I believe in transparency and honesty with you as the viewer. As always, please be sure to watch multiple reviews before you make your final purchase decision. Now, if you're interested in seeing my review of the XM6's baby bro, the Sony ULT Wear, check out the video I'll leave for you right up here on the screen. Those are still my all-time favorite headphones, under $200. Easy recommendation, so definitely check it out if you don't want to spend, the full flagship money. Now, with all that said, my name is JEFE, and I'm out. Peace.